The numbers, the numbers. Originally, we filmed Ben Beaver. We got very excited watching Ben Beaver juggle and thought it'd be really nice to make a little film. So we filmed Ben Beaver doing about 50 patterns with balls, and then we thought perhaps it would be nice to do a film about siteswaps in general. And then we thought, well, actually, if we have ball patterns, we should have perhaps patterns with other props. So we filmed a few patterns with rings and a few patterns with bouncing balls and a few patterns with clubs. And then somebody went, do you have, say, 6, 2, 3, 1 with clubs? And then we no, we don't have that, we should have that. And then some people came over from Finland and we filmed them, and we met some people in South America. And slowly this thing just started growing. It almost kind of developed a life of its own. And in a sense, what I find fascinating is that the growth of our little project, our little Siteswap project, has been parallel, or it mirrors the growth of Siteswaps from Paul Klimek on his own on the West Coast, developing this notation in the early 80s, to now I think there must be tens of thousands of people on the internet exchanging patterns. The growth is phenomenal, and it does seem like, in a sense, Siteswaps has become this extremely important aspect of juggling. And so in a sense, I'm glad that what we have done has been so encyclopedic, because it is such an encyclopedic subject matter. In my opinion, it's completely linked with the internet. It is possible that a number of people did discover Siteswaps before and it didn't spread because people didn't publish or didn't put it on the internet. It started really spreading when Boppo and Banked and all those people that were posting about Siteswaps in the kind of early 90s started spreading it through the internet. And I mean, now there's translations of Siteswaps into 40 different languages. I mean, it's spreading just gigantically. It's extraordinary.
And how should one watch this DVD?
In an ideal world, we would love the DVD to be a little bit like a web page or a magazine that one can dip in. And so perhaps you're in the mood for watching 4-object multiplex patterns, or you're curious about how bouncing balls would work in period 5-object patterns. Hopefully it's something that you can dip in and journey through it in different ways. Obviously the DVD format is restrictive, so there's certain restrictions that you will have. Ideally it's a dip in and watch whatever you want. If you're just starting out, what I would suggest would be to watch one of the basic explanations first. Certainly for us, Siteswaps are very much a living thing, and something that was really important for us in this DVD was that they're not cold, abstract numbers. I mean, they're nice, cold, abstract numbers as well, and some people really get off on that, but it's that transformation into physical, real patterns that excites us. And something that I got very happy with was all the marvelous contributions from all over the world that really show how much the transformation of the notation into real patterns is alive and well and constantly growing. And in my personal opinion, Siteswaps is too elegant, too concise a system to ever be replaced by anything simpler. If juggling were to get more complicated, or if 3-handed juggling became very popular, it might be that other parallel notations would evolve. But I certainly think that Siteswaps is a little bit the periodic table of juggling. What the periodic table is to chemistry, Siteswaps is to juggling. And in 1,000 years' time, my guess is that Siteswaps will be around. In my opinion, the parallel is closer with something like the periodic table, in that musical notation is culturally dependent. For example, an Indian scale is different from a Western scale, and there's a bias that's towards a cultural understanding of music, even though, strictly speaking, if you measure frequencies and things like that, it can be quite scientifically precise. Siteswaps is completely immutable. It's determined mathematically. So it's similar to musical notation and different. However, what's fascinating in relationship to musical notation is musical notation by 1280, it was already so elaborate. That's 800 years ago. So musicians have 8 centuries of a marvelously complex notation. We've had 25 years. So from a point of view of thinking, for those of us who believe that juggling is potentially an exciting art form, or that juggling is a language that you can mold to make all these things, the fact that we have a way of notating, understanding and creating this language is extremely exciting. And I would love to have a peek at the juggling that's being made in 250 years' time, and if people are using this notation with the ease with which musicians use their notation, there's wondrous juggling to be seen. There's wondrous juggling to be seen. There's wondrous juggling to be seen. To be honest, we would not have been able to make this DVD without there must be at least 50 people who've contributed. It's just been fantastic. We've been very, very lucky that so many people have agreed to give us patterns, to fly in from all over the world, to be filmed. We've been fortunate in that through our show travels, we've met people and found locations where we've been able to film patterns, and all the creative team around this project has spent hours and hours lighting things, filming things. So I am endlessly thankful to all the jugglers and technical people who've helped with this. It really wouldn't have been possible without them. In terms of the history, I think I don't want to talk about it too much, because I think that the interviews give a very clear sense. If people are interested in the history of it, the interviews give a very clear sense of who did what when. The reason we filmed the interviews came from conversations with Vincent Bruel, who does a lot of the bouncing ball patterns on the DVD, and Vincent suggested that we should really, that it would be very exciting to have interviews with all the people who came up with a notation. So it was after Vincent suggesting this that we went on a kind of pilgrimage to interview all the Siteswap pioneers, if one can call them that. The one thing that we found through our interviews was some of the writing on the history of Siteswap has slight distortions, and inevitably history is always a subjective process that's constantly being rewritten. What we have found that's perhaps a little bit different from how it's been written is Paul Klimek is certainly, from the people who are known to have come up with the system, the first one. Paul Klimek came up with the system in 1981, 1982 on the west coast of the States. There's somebody else called Don Hatch, who around 1983, we're not sure of the exact date, had a similar system, and him and Paul met and discussed the numbers, and they seem to have many patterns that were very similar. As far as I know, Don has never published anywhere, so it could also be that there's tens of people who came up with the system and never published. Again, this links up with the internet. The interesting link for us is I would divide the groups of people that came up with Siteswaps into two groups. There's the English European group, the Cambridge group, and there's the American group. And there's a link between Paul Klimek and Bruce Tiemann, which is fascinating in that Bruce, who was known in the juggling world at that time as Boppo, was working on diagrams, a kind of version of ladder diagrams, and in fact he talks about them on the interview. Whereas Paul had gone from the diagrams to the numbers, which I think is the kind of the crucial leap for understanding Siteswap notation. And they met, and I think they met in 84, 85, and when they met, Paul showed the numbers to Boppo. And Boppo later popularized them, publishing various articles, including the internet articles, which I think were the ones that were responsible for the big spread. So there's that little link there, which I think is a crucial link. There's that little transmitting of knowledge between Paul and Boppo. And the other interesting link is within the Cambridge trio, and I think we're talking 84, 85 with the Cambridge trio, who are Adam, Mike, and Colin. There's that crucial leap between ladders and numbers, or diagrams and numbers. And it's slightly unclear exactly who within the group did that leap. if you listen to Mike Day, it was the other two, then Colin says it was the other. Each one of them politely says it was the other two. So from my personal experience of Mike Day normally is the most historically accurate person I know. But again, it's marvelous. It's a marvelous illustration of how subjective history can be. Within that, we have very precise dates, within 6 months in both groups. Other fascinating thing is that there is numerous people that came up with diagrammatic systems, illustrative systems, and I have documents suggesting there's at least 15, but there's probably about 25 different people. Whereas the number of people that went from the diagrams to the numbers are fewer and far between. And it seems to me, in terms of siteswaps being a numerical notation, that little leap is the crucial leap. Ironically, there's the opposite leap, which is the leap that Martin Frost did, which was to go from the numbers, and he was working in spin amount, to go from the numbers to the diagrams. And he is happier in a diagram place. In terms of more sophisticated notations, there are a couple of more sophisticated notations. In terms of describing most of the juggling that people need to do for practical reasons, siteswaps and Jack Boyce's extensions of siteswaps, which are synchronous notation and multiplex notation and passing notation, pretty much cover anything one needs to do. If juggling were to get more complex, like contemporary classical music, where you needed to have, say, 3 hands with 2 hands working at a third interval and a third one sort of bouncing off on a kind of weird time thing, then my 2 suggestions would be causal diagrams, which are great for taking, say, 3 jugglers on different rhythms, and you quickly draw your lines between, and you can cover pretty much any pattern. That gets slightly into problems with multiplex throws, but there's ways around that. And if one wants an elegant numerical notation, there's Ed Carson's much underrated multi-handed notation, which I think he came up with, don't quote me on this, but I think he came up with in 1992 and has since been reinvented under several different other names. But it's a marvelously elegant notation. And in fact, back in 1992, 93, Jack Boyce and Ed Carson's together, I think Jack Boyce wrote J2, which Ed Carson included in his Juggle Pro software. And that software already then could do, you could ask it to generate 3 against 2 patterns. So say a 3-handed person juggling synchronously, passing with a 2-handed person who was juggling at twice the speed. And brrr, this list of patterns would appear. I think MHN, or multi-handed notation, hasn't taken off, partly because we're maybe not ready for such complex rhythmic patterns. But I'm sure there'll be a future generation of 3-handed aliens that will need MHN. And basically, what we've tried to do is every pattern has got a little number in the corner or down underneath. We've placed it. We've taken liberties as to where we place the title, but we've tried to always put a title which is the most concise way we know how to describe a pattern in siteswap notation or the equivalent notation, whether it's synchronous notation or passing notation, but they all relate back to siteswaps. There's a couple of extra bits of information. We've tried not to clutter the screen. At one point we were going to put all kinds of extra things, but we decided to just stay simple. So we put the pattern, and if the pattern isn't ground state and needs a get in and a get out, we've put a get in and a get out. We've chosen that. We've tried to choose the one we thought would be the simplest, and obviously that's a subjective judgment. So, for example, 5-1, the 3-ball shower, 5-1. The get-in we've put on the video is 4, and we've put 2 as a get-out. There are other, for example, you could get in with a 5-2 and go out with a 4-1, and they're both as valid. It's a choice between strawberries and apples, whatever one prefers, and we've chosen strawberries. The other case is patterns that have a little subloop within them. So, for example, 4-5-1-2, you could stay on the 5-1 and just repeat that. So we've made the 5-1 a different color. That's basically the convention we've taken. So the definition I use of prime is Jack Boyce's definition of prime patterns. And basically, a prime pattern is a pattern that doesn't have any repeatable subsequences within it. In terms of states, and Alan Knutson explains this very well later in he's talking about states and explaining states. In terms of states, it's a closed loop within a state diagram. So for example, an example of a prime pattern is 4-2, whereas the popular 4-2-3 isn't prime because you can divide it up into 4-2 and 3. So it's a composite pattern of 4-2 and 3. We've tried in as much as possible to not have an aesthetic choice in our choice of patterns, and inevitably that's impossible because we all have aesthetic criteria. The idealist perspective that we're coming from is that they're all interesting and they all exist. So if they exist, they're interesting. And we're trying to not think of that in terms of, wow, all of a sudden say 66111 is interesting because you can do the ones behind the back. But actually, even just structurally, it's an interesting thing. And it's interesting to think that some of the early siteswap generators excluded things like 1-1s or 2-0s. Some people don't like 0s, some people don't like 2s, some people don't like 1s, some people don't like very big throws. There's an aesthetic bias to all of us. We've tried in as much as possible not to have that. So what I like is that every pattern has a multitude of variations, and there'll be an interesting one in there somewhere that will please somewhere. I would like to take a pattern with an infinite amount of balls that goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I would like to, since I'm on a desert island, which is a hypothetical physical place, I would like to juggle this pattern with accelerating beat. If I can take that liberty in Siteswaps and juggle it faster and faster, so that, say, I'll start throwing the balls at once every second, and then I'll go faster and half that, and I'll keep halving it. And so I'll hopefully be able to finish that in a finite amount of time. So I'll juggle an infinite Siteswap in a finite amount of time, and that will make me very happy. That's the Siteswap I want to take to a desert island. If I have to be more practical, Denis Pommier taught us a very nice pattern the other day, which was, if I can remember it, it was 4-2p, 1-1p. Yeah, I think that's what it was. 4-2p, 1-1p. And I think I'd like to take this to a desert island. But you have to be careful which Siteswaps you take to a desert island, because the danger is that you take something that you're really enjoying at the moment, and in a month you won't enjoy necessarily. So maybe to a desert island, one should only take the Siteswaps which one has enjoyed for 10 years or more. But it's
you're on your own on the desert island.
Oh dear. Oh yeah. No, so I
patterns.
can't. No, so in fact I won't take that one.
You can't take
No, I can't take that one. Is there not even a monkey that I can do this with? I'll be on the desert island, me and a monkey, and I'll teach the monkey this 4-2p, 1-1p, and he'll enjoy it. Monkeys are really good at doing those patterns. I think I would take 5-3-4 as well, because 5-3-4. 5-3-4 was for me the first Siteswap pattern I saw, and it was so beautiful. Mike Day showed it to me, and it was just so beautiful. And just going back briefly to Mike Day, as an aside, something I found fascinating was way back, and this must be 86, 87, Mike Day showed us 6x4. So can you imagine, 1990, 1991, there's Mike Day shows us 6x4, we learn 6x4. There's probably 4 of us on the planet juggling 6x4. Today, there's probably 1,000 people juggling 6x4. 6x4 has become a standard. 5-3-4 has become a standard. There's all these patterns that back then when you were juggling, you felt like you were juggling this thing that maybe a handful of people had juggled, you were discovering this thing. And all of a sudden, these things, people talk about them like they're classic. It's extraordinary.